Some secrets are better left buried, especially those that echo through the trees. For years, people have reported strange, chilling whispers in the November air of the Whispering Woods. Are you brave enough to confront the truth behind these eerie sounds, or will their unsettling origin be too terrifying to comprehend? Prepare to be truly unsettled. The fog rolls in thick on November mornings in the Whispering Woods, transforming familiar paths into corridors of uncertainty. I stand at the forest's edge, watching tendrils of mist weave between the skeletal branches of oak and ash trees that have stood sentinel here for centuries. The air carries that peculiar November cold, the kind that seeps through layers of clothing and settles deep in your bones. It is early, barely past dawn, and the world feels suspended between night and day, between the natural and the supernatural. My breath forms small clouds that dissolve into the greater fog as I take my first steps onto the leaf-strewn trail. The sound is immediately noticeable. Every footfall seems amplified, unnaturally loud against the profound silence that permeates these woods. But it is not truly silent, I realize. There is something else. A soft murmuring, barely audible, like distant conversation carried on a wind that I cannot feel against my skin. The locals call them the Whispers, and they are the reason I have come. The Whispering Woods span nearly 300 acres of old-growth forest in the heart of New England. For generations, this place has been avoided during November, particularly in the final weeks of the month. The legend is older than anyone can accurately date, passed down through families like a cautionary tale told to keep children from wandering too far from home. But it is not just children's stories that brought me here. It is the consistency of the accounts, the unwavering certainty in the voices of those who claim to have heard something inexplicable among these trees. I move deeper into the woods, and the whispers seem to grow more distinct, though no clearer in their meaning. They rise and fall in waves, sometimes fading to near silence before swelling again into an almost comprehensible murmur. The rational part of my mind catalogs possible explanations. Wind through the branches, certainly. The rustling of the last autumn leaves clinging stubbornly to their perches. Perhaps the sound of a distant stream, distorted by the fog and the unique topography of the forest floor. But there is something about the quality of these sounds that defies easy categorization. They possess an almost rhythmic quality, a cadence that mimics human speech without ever quite becoming it. I stop walking and close my eyes, trying to isolate individual elements of what I am hearing. There, beneath the obvious natural sounds, is something else. A layering of tones that seems to shift and change, never settling into any recognizable pattern. The trees here are remarkable in their age and density. The canopy above, even stripped of most of its summer foliage, creates a ceiling that filters the weak November sunlight into a gray-green dimness. Moss clings to the north sides of trunks, and fallen logs in various stages of decay create obstacles across the path. Everything is damp, not from rain but from the perpetual moisture that hangs in the air this time of year. It is the kind of dampness that makes everything feel slightly rotted, slightly wrong. Local folklore attributes the whispers to various sources, depending on who is telling the story. The oldest tales speak of indigenous peoples who once inhabited this land, suggesting that the sounds are the voices of ancestors warning away those who would disturb sacred ground. Later stories, dating to colonial times, tell of settlers who vanished into these woods during harsh November storms, their cries for help supposedly trapped forever in the trees that witnessed their final moments. More recent accounts, no less chilling for their modernity, describe the whispers as something entirely inhuman, perhaps not even of this world. What strikes me most is how the phenomenon seems to intensify as November progresses. Early in the month, the reports are sporadic and uncertain. But as the days shorten and the temperature drops, as the last leaves fall and the woods take on their winter aspect, the whispers become impossible to ignore. They peak, according to local accounts, in the final week of November, particularly on foggy mornings like this one. I have been walking for perhaps 20 minutes when I reach a small clearing. Here, the fog seems to pool and swirl in strange patterns as if caught in invisible currents. The whispers are louder here, or perhaps I have simply become more attuned to them. I pull out my recording equipment, hoping to capture anything, that might later be analyzed with more sophisticated tools than my own ears can provide. As I set up the microphone, I notice something that sends a chill down my spine that has nothing to do with the November cold. The whispers seem to respond to my presence. They do not change in volume or pitch, but there is a subtle shift in their rhythm, as if acknowledging that someone is listening. I tell myself this is imagination, the human tendency to find patterns and meaning where none exist. But the feeling persists. The forest around me is utterly still. No birds call, no small animals rustle through the undergrowth. It is as if every living thing has retreated, leaving only the trees and the fog and the whispers. I press the record button and wait, my heart beating harder than the cold and the walk can account for. The sounds continue, rising and falling, never quite becoming words but never quite being anything else either. What are these whispers? Are they merely the product of unique acoustic properties, the way sound travels through this particular arrangement of trees and terrain? Or is there something more, something that cannot be explained by science and reason? The questions hang in the fog-laden air, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. But I am determined to find out, even if the truth proves more unsettling than the mystery itself. The small town of Millbrook sits at the southern edge of the Whispering Woods, a collection of weathered houses and old storefronts that seem frozen in an earlier time. It is here that I begin my search for answers, seeking out those who have experienced the whispers firsthand. The locals are initially reluctant to speak, their eyes holding a mixture of superstition and genuine fear when I mention my purpose. But slowly stories begin to emerge. Margaret Chin, who has lived in Millbrook for 67 years, invites me into her kitchen where the smell of coffee and old wood fills the air. Her hands wrap around a mug as she stares out the window toward the distant tree line. I heard them when I was 16, she begins, her voice steady but quiet. It was the day before Thanksgiving, and I had gone into the woods to gather pine cones for decorations. The whispers started soft, like someone calling my name from far away. But as I walked deeper, they grew louder. Not in volume, but in intensity. It felt like they were inside my head. I ran, and I have never gone back, not in November. Never in November. Thomas Blackwood, a retired logger who spent 40 years working in and around the Whispering Woods, offers a different perspective. We meet at the local diner, and he leans close across the table as he speaks. I have heard things in those woods that no man should hear. Voices begging for help, screaming in pain, whispering secrets I could never quite make out. Most months, the forest is just a forest. But November changes it. The trees remember things, I think. Old deaths, old sorrows. The whispers are strongest near the eastern section, where the land dips into that hollow. That is where the real darkness lives. Sarah Winters, a young mother of 2, describes an experience from just 3 years ago. My husband and I were hiking, trying to beat the winter blues with some exercise. We knew the stories but thought they were just local color, you know? But when we heard the whispers, there was no dismissing them. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. What frightened me most was that they seemed to know we were there. When we stopped, they stopped. When we started walking again, they followed. We made it out fine, but my husband refuses to even drive past those woods now. These accounts, compelling as they are, might be dismissed as imagination or the power of suggestion if not for the historical records I uncover at the Millbrook Historical Society. Eleanor Grant, the Society's curator, pulls out a leather-bound ledger dating to 1847. Her finger traces faded ink as she reads aloud. November 24, 1847. 3 men from the logging camp report hearing voices in the deep woods. They describe the sounds as similar to human speech but somehow wrong, as if coming from mouths not meant for speaking. The men refuse to return to that section of the forest. The records continue through the decades, each entry documenting similar experiences. An 1889 newspaper clipping from the Millbrook Gazette carries the headline, "Mystery Sounds Plague Local Woods." The article describes how multiple residents reported hearing whispers during a particularly cold November, with some claiming the sounds drove them to near madness. A map from 1923, yellowed and brittle, marks certain areas of the woods with small red crosses and the notation, "Avoid in late autumn, unexplained phenomena." What makes these historical accounts so unsettling is their consistency. The descriptions remain remarkably similar across more than a century and a half. The whispers always manifest in November. They always seem to possess an almost intelligent quality. They always intensify in specific locations within the woods. This pattern suggests something more than mass hysteria or the power of suggestion. I discover a particularly intriguing account in a journal entry from 1956, written by Dr. Robert Hensley, a psychologist who came to Millbrook specifically to investigate the phenomenon. His clinical observations lend credibility to what might otherwise be dismissed as folklore. I entered the Whispering Woods on November 27th with recording equipment and an open but skeptical mind, he wrote. What I experienced defies easy explanation. The sounds I heard possessed qualities that cannot be attributed to wind or wildlife. There was a structure to them, a pattern that suggested communication, though the content remained maddeningly unclear. More disturbing was the psychological effect. I found myself becoming disoriented, anxious, and prone to intrusive thoughts I could not explain. I left the woods after 2 hours, and the effects lingered for days. Dr. Hensley's recordings, stored in the Historical Society's archives, crackle with age, but the whispers are unmistakable. Even through the degraded audio quality, there is something profoundly unsettling about the sounds. They rise and fall in waves, occasionally coalescing into something that almost sounds like words before dissolving back into incomprehensible murmuring. Perhaps most bizarre are the accounts that describe the whisper's content. While most people report being unable to understand what is being said, a small number claim to have discerned fragments of meaning. James Porter, speaking to me outside the town's only gas station, describes his experience from 5 years ago. I swear I heard my dead brother's voice in those whispers. He died in a car accident 20 years back, but I would know his voice anywhere. He was saying my name over and over like he was trying to warn me about something. I got out of there fast, and I have had nightmares ever since. Similar accounts pepper the historical record. A woman in 1934 claimed to hear her daughter's voice, though her daughter was safe at home. A man in 1978 reported hearing what he believed was Latin, though he knew no Latin himself. Another described hearing what sounded like Native American chants, though he could not identify the language or tribe. These accounts of seemingly personalized messages add another layer of mystery to an already perplexing phenomenon. As I compile these testimonies, a picture begins to emerge, though it is one that raises more questions than it answers. The Whispering Woods are not simply the subject of local superstition. They are the site of a genuine and documented phenomenon that has persisted for generations. The whispers are real, heard by too many people across too many years to be dismissed as imagination. But what creates them? What purpose, if any, do they serve? And why do they only manifest in November? The historical records suggest that the woods have always possessed this quality, perhaps even before European settlement. References to indigenous peoples avoiding the area during late autumn appear in early colonial writings, suggesting the phenomenon predates the current name and legend. Whatever the whispers are, they have been echoing through these trees for a very long time, waiting for listeners brave or foolish enough to seek them out. Armed with local accounts and historical documentation, I turn to science for answers. Dr. Amanda Richardson, an acoustic physicist from the University of Vermont, agrees to accompany me into the Whispering Woods with specialized equipment designed to analyze sound in unprecedented detail. As we prepare for our expedition, she explains the various natural phenomena that could create the illusion of whispers. Sound behaves in fascinating ways in forested environments, she says, adjusting the sensitive microphones that will capture audio across multiple frequencies. The human brain is exceptionally good at finding patterns, especially patterns that resemble human speech. We call it auditory pareidolia. It is the same phenomenon that makes us hear voices in white noise or see faces in random shapes. Combine that with the acoustic properties of a dense forest, and you have the perfect conditions for a mystery. We enter the woods on a cold November morning. The fog is thick as it was during my first visit. Dr. Richardson sets up equipment at various points, creating a network of recording devices that will allow us to triangulate sound sources and analyze how they travel through the forest. The whispers begin almost immediately, that same unsettling murmur that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. Fascinating, Dr. Richardson murmurs, studying the real-time analysis on her tablet. What we are hearing is actually a complex layering of several natural sounds. The primary component is wind moving through the forest canopy. But notice how the sound changes as it moves through different types of trees. The oak trees, with their rough bark and angular branches, create a different acoustic signature than the smoother ash or maple. When these sounds layer together, they can create the illusion of voices. She points to a cluster of particularly old trees, their trunks massive and gnarled with age. These old-growth specimens are key. Their size and shape create resonance chambers, essentially natural amplifiers. Wind passes through the hollows and cavities in the wood, producing tones that are remarkably similar to human vocalizations. Add in the natural reverb created by the forest density, and you get sounds that can seem to be coming from multiple directions simultaneously. But the wind explanation, while compelling, does not account for everything. I mentioned the accounts of people hearing whispers on still days when no breeze stirs the branches. Dr. Richardson nods thoughtfully. That is where wildlife comes in. Many animals produce vocalizations that, when heard at a distance or filtered through forest acoustics, can sound eerily human. Foxes, for instance, have a scream that has terrified people for centuries. Ravens can mimic human speech patterns. Even deer produce sounds that, in the right conditions, could contribute to the overall effect. We move deeper into the woods, and Dr. Richardson's equipment begins picking up sounds outside the range of human hearing. Infrasound, she explains, showing me the readings. Frequencies below 20 Hz that humans cannot consciously hear but that can affect us psychologically. These low frequencies can create feelings of unease, anxiety, even fear. They can be produced by wind moving through certain geological formations, by the subtle vibrations of large trees swaying in ways we cannot see. The human body responds to infrasound even when we are not aware of it. The temperature plays a role as well. As Dr. Richardson demonstrates, November's unique weather patterns create temperature inversions, where cold air becomes trapped beneath warmer layers. This inversion acts like an acoustic mirror, reflecting and amplifying sounds in unusual ways. A deer moving through the undergrowth half a mile away might sound as if it is right beside you. The distant highway, normally inaudible, can suddenly seem much closer. These acoustic tricks can transform ordinary sounds into something mysterious and unsettling. We spend hours in the woods, and Dr. Richardson's scientific explanations begin to demystify the phenomenon. The topography of the forest floor creates natural sound channels, guiding noise along specific paths and creating the illusion that sounds are following you. The bare branches of November allow sound to travel farther than it would in the acoustically dampened environment of summer foliage. The dampness in the air, the fog itself, affects how sound waves propagate and how our ears perceive them. What about the reports of personalized messages? I ask. People hearing their names or the voices of deceased relatives? Dr. Richardson pauses before answering, choosing her words carefully. That is where psychology intersects with acoustics. The human brain is constantly trying to make sense of ambiguous stimuli. When we hear sounds that vaguely resemble speech, our brain fills in the gaps based on our expectations, our fears, our memories. In an environment like this, where people come expecting to hear something supernatural, it is not surprising that they interpret ambiguous sounds in highly personal ways. She sets up one final experiment, using a high-quality recording of the whispers played back through speakers at various points in the forest. As we listen to the playback, certain elements do sound distinctly like words. Our brains try to lock onto them, to create meaning from meaninglessness. This is the power of suggestion, Dr. Richardson explains. Once someone tells you these are whispers, that is what you will hear. The same sounds, presented as wind and wildlife, would not provoke the same response. As our scientific expedition concludes, Dr. Richardson compiles her findings into a comprehensive report. According to her analysis, the Whispering Woods phenomenon can be explained by a combination of factors. Unique topography, old-growth trees with natural resonance properties, temperature inversions, wind patterns, wildlife vocalizations, infrasound, and the human tendency toward pattern recognition and auditory pareidolia. Together, These elements create an experience that feels supernatural but has entirely natural origins. Her conclusions are persuasive, backed by data and analysis that is difficult to dispute. Yet as we pack up the equipment and prepare to leave the woods, I cannot shake a nagging doubt. The scientific explanations account for what we heard, but do they account for how it felt? The sense of presence, the feeling of being watched or listened to, the way the sounds seem to respond to our movements. Dr. Richardson's instruments measured acoustic properties, but they could not measure the profound unease that settled over me during our time in the woods. Science has provided answers, rational and evidence-based answers that should satisfy any reasonable person. But as I stand at the edge of the whispering woods, the fog beginning to lift as morning advances, I wonder if perhaps the scientific explanation is only part of the story. Perhaps some phenomena exist at the intersection of the natural and the supernatural, where reason and mystery meet but never quite resolve. The whispers continue behind me, indifferent to our attempts to explain them away. Despite Dr. Richardson's compelling scientific analysis, something draws me back to the whispering woods. This time, I come equipped not with instruments of science, but with tools designed to detect the undetectable. Mark Sullivan, a paranormal investigator with 15 years of experience, accompanies me. His equipment bag contains EVP recorders, electromagnetic field detectors, and infrared cameras. If there is something beyond natural explanation in these woods, we intend to find it. We enter the forest in the late afternoon, timing our arrival so that darkness will fall while we are deep in the woods. Mark believes that paranormal activity often intensifies after sunset, though he admits there is no scientific basis for this assumption. It is simply a pattern he has observed over years of investigation. The whispers are already present, that familiar murmuring that I have come to know but never quite understand. The key is to approach this with an open mind but a critical eye, Mark says as we set up our first recording station. Not everything unexplained is paranormal, but not everything can be explained away by science either. Sometimes the truth exists in the gray areas. He activates an EVP recorder, a device designed to capture electronic voice phenomena, sounds that allegedly exist outside normal human perception but can be recorded and played back. We move through the forest methodically, stopping every few hundred yards to record. Mark asks questions aloud, a technique he calls spirit communication. If there is anyone here who wishes to communicate, please make your presence known. We mean no harm. We simply wish to understand. His voice echoes through the trees, and the whispers seem to swell in response. It could be coincidence, the natural ebb and flow of wind and sound, or it could be something else. As darkness falls, the forest transforms. What was unsettling in daylight becomes genuinely frightening in the dark. Our flashlight beams create moving shadows that seem to writhe and dance among the trees. The whispers take on a different quality at night, more urgent somehow, more insistent. Mark's electromagnetic field detector begins registering unusual readings, fluctuations that he says are consistent with paranormal activity. "Look at this," he says, showing me the device's display. The readings spike and fall in patterns that seem too regular to be random interference. This is what we call an intelligent response pattern. The EMF fluctuations are responding to our questions, to our movements. It suggests some form of energy that possesses awareness, perhaps even intention. I want to believe there is a natural explanation, perhaps underground mineral deposits or even my phone interfering with the equipment, but Mark has accounted for these possibilities. We reach the eastern hollow that Thomas Blackwood mentioned, the place where he claimed the real darkness lives. Even before we descend into the depression, I feel the change. The air grows colder, not gradually but suddenly, as if we have stepped through an invisible barrier. The whispers here are louder, more distinct, and they possess a quality that raises the hair on my arms. They sound angry or perhaps desperate. It is impossible to know which. Mark sets up multiple recording devices around the hollow, creating what he calls a paranormal net designed to capture activity from all angles. As we wait in the cold darkness, he tells me about a theory he has developed over years of investigation. "I believe certain locations can act as recording devices," he explains. "Traumatic events, strong emotions, violent deaths, These things leave an imprint on a place. Not in a physical sense that science can measure, but in an energetic sense. What people perceive as hauntings might be these recordings playing back, triggered by the right conditions. The concept of residual energy is not new, but Mark's version is more nuanced than typical ghost stories. He suggests that the Whispering Woods, with their old-growth trees and unique geological properties, might be particularly good at retaining these energetic imprints. November's specific atmospheric conditions, the cold, the fog, the bare trees, might create the perfect circumstances for these recordings to manifest as audible phenomena. But there is another possibility, Mark continues, his voice dropping lower. Some paranormal researchers believe in intelligent hauntings, where consciousness persists after death and attempts to communicate with the living. If the whispers are intelligent rather than residual, then we are not dealing with recordings but with actual entities attempting to reach out. The idea is chilling, made more so by the oppressive darkness surrounding us and the whispers that seem to grow more insistent by the moment. At precisely midnight, something happens that defies easy explanation. All of Mark's equipment registers simultaneously, every detector, every recorder showing activity. The whispers surge into what can only be described as a crescendo, loud enough that we both take involuntary steps backward. And then, clear as day, I hear my name. Not a sound that could be interpreted as my name, not pareidolia or pattern recognition, but my actual name spoken in a voice I do not recognize. Mark's face in the flashlight beam shows a mixture of excitement and fear. "Did you hear that?" he asks, though my expression must confirm that I did. We play back the recordings immediately, and there it is, captured clearly on multiple devices. My name, spoken by a voice that should not exist in these woods. Dr. Richardson's scientific explanations suddenly seem inadequate, unable to account for this impossible moment. The rest of the night passes in a blur of activity. Mark's equipment continues to register anomalous readings. We capture multiple EVP recordings that, when played back, seem to contain fragments of speech. The words are never entirely clear, always just at the edge of comprehension, but they are undeniably there. And through it all, the whispers continue, sometimes fading to near silence before returning with renewed intensity. As dawn approaches and we finally prepare to leave the woods, I am exhausted but electrified. The scientific explanation provided comfort, a rational framework for understanding the phenomenon. But this night has shattered that comfort. Whatever exists in the Whispering Woods, it is not content to be explained away by acoustics and psychology. It wants to be heard, perhaps even understood. Mark reviews his findings as we drive back to Millbrook. Hours of recordings to analyze, EMF data to interpret, infrared footage to review. He believes we have captured evidence of genuine paranormal activity, though he knows such claims will be met with skepticism. The thing about the paranormal, he says, is that it exists whether we believe in it or not. These woods have been whispering for generations, and they will continue to whisper long after we are gone. The question is not whether something is there, but whether we have the courage to acknowledge it. I think about Dr. Richardson's careful scientific analysis, about the local legends and historical accounts, about my own experiences in these woods. Two explanations exist, both compelling in their own ways. The natural and the supernatural, the explained and the inexplicable. Perhaps the truth is that they are not mutually exclusive. Perhaps the Whispering Woods operate according to laws we do not yet understand, where science and the supernatural blur into something altogether different and far more unsettling. I stand once more at the edge of the Whispering Woods, the morning fog rolling through the trees in familiar patterns. It has been 3 weeks since my nocturnal investigation with Mark Sullivan, 3 weeks of analyzing evidence and wrestling with contradictory conclusions. The whispers continue, indifferent to our attempts to understand them. They have outlasted centuries of speculation and will likely outlast many more. The scientific explanation provided by Dr. Richardson remains compelling. Her data clearly demonstrates how natural phenomena can create the illusion of voices in the woods. The acoustic properties of old-growth forests, the psychological tendency toward pattern recognition, the effects of infrasound on human emotion, these are real and measurable factors. They account for much, perhaps even most, of what people experience in the Whispering Woods. Yet the paranormal evidence cannot be easily dismissed. Mark's recordings, particularly the moment when my name was spoken, suggest something beyond natural explanation. The consistent reports across generations of people hearing personalized messages, the way the whispers seem to respond to human presence, the profound psychological impact that persists long after leaving the woods, these elements resist easy categorization. I have come to believe that the truth about the Whispering Woods does not lie in choosing one explanation over another, but in accepting that some mysteries exist at the intersection of the known and the unknown. The woods are haunted, perhaps, but not in the way that simple ghost stories suggest. They are haunted by history, by the accumulated weight of human emotion and experience that has soaked into the soil and the trees over centuries. They are haunted by the unique combination of geology and ecology that creates acoustic phenomena we are only beginning to understand. The locals of Millbrook have learned to live with the mystery. They avoid the woods in November, not out of superstition exactly, but out of respect for something they cannot quite name. Margaret Chin still lives in her house at the forest's edge, still refuses to enter the trees during late autumn. Thomas Blackwood still tells his stories at the diner, still insists that the Eastern Hollow holds something dark and aware. Sarah Winters still drives past the woods without looking, still has nightmares about the whispers that followed her. These people are not fools, and they are not purely imaginative. They have experienced something real, even if the nature of that reality remains debatable. The Whispering Woods have affected them, changed them in subtle but permanent ways. This is perhaps the most undeniable evidence of all. Not recordings or data, but the lasting impact on human consciousness. Whatever the whispers are, they possess power. They reach into the mind and leave marks that time does not fully erase. I think about Dr. Robert Hensley, the psychologist who investigated the woods in 1956 and wrote about the psychological effects that lingered for days after his visit. I understand now what he meant. The woods get inside you. The whispers become part of your internal landscape, echoing in quiet moments when you least expect them. I still hear them sometimes, in the rustle of wind through trees, in the white noise of rain, in the hum of electronics. My brain, having learned to recognize that particular pattern, now finds it everywhere. The historical records suggest this has always been the nature of the Whispering Woods. They do not simply create sounds that people hear and forget. They create experiences that shape perception, that alter the way people relate to silence and sound, to nature and the supernatural. The indigenous peoples who avoided this land understood something fundamental that we, with our scientific instruments and paranormal equipment, are only beginning to grasp. Some places are different. Some places exist outside normal categories. Mark Sullivan continues to analyze the evidence we collected. He believes we captured proof of intelligent paranormal activity, and perhaps we did. But I find myself more interested in the question of what such proof would mean. If the whispers are indeed the voices of the dead, or of some other form of consciousness that persists in these woods, what are they trying to communicate? Are they warnings, as some legends suggest? Are they simply echoes, residual energies replaying endlessly without awareness or purpose? Or are they something else entirely, something for which we have no adequate framework or language? The phenomenon peaks in the final week of November, according to the historical pattern. As I write this, we are approaching that time once again. The fog will thicken, the temperature will drop, and the whispers will reach their annual crescendo. People will hear them just as people have heard them for generations. Some will find natural explanations satisfying. Others will embrace supernatural interpretations. Most will simply feel the unease, the sense that something inexplicable brushes against the edges of ordinary reality. I encourage you, whoever is reading this or listening to this account, to consider your own relationship with mystery. We live in an age that demands explanation, that insists every phenomenon must be categorized and understood. But perhaps some things are meant to remain partially unexplained. Perhaps the value of mysteries like the Whispering Woods lies not in solving them, but in letting them remind us that the world is stranger and more complex than our theories can fully encompass. If you have experienced something similar, if you have heard whispers in places where no voices should exist, I invite you to share your story. Not because I can explain it, but because these shared experiences create a larger picture, a mosaic of the unexplained that might reveal patterns we cannot yet see. The Whispering Woods are not unique. Similar phenomena occur in forests and wild places around the world. What does this tell us about the relationship between landscape and consciousness, between place and perception? As for me, I will return to the Whispering Woods, not to prove or disprove anything, but simply to listen. The whispers continue regardless of our explanations, and there is something profound in that persistence. They remind us that the world existed before our understanding and will continue long after. They invite us into mystery rather than away from it. The final truth about the Whispering Woods may be that there is no final truth, only layers of partial understanding that never quite cohere into a complete picture. The scientific explanation reveals how it happens. The paranormal explanation suggests why it matters. But neither can fully capture the experience of standing in that fog-shrouded forest, hearing voices that should not exist, feeling the presence of something that defies categorization. Some secrets are better left partially buried. Not because they are too terrifying to face, but because their value lies in remaining secret, in maintaining that space between knowledge and mystery where wonder still exists. The Whispering Woods will continue to whisper, and we will continue to listen, and the question of what we are hearing will remain beautifully, terrifyingly unresolved. The echoes persist. They always have. They always will. And perhaps that is answer enough.